And all of us have experience of searching on digital databases and how our search is influenced as we look into these digital databases. And here are some good and bad examples of AI. When I say bad, where things have gone wrong because of AI. So the first one is about a self-driving car. It failed to identify a cyclist and a bicycle as an imminent collision danger. And then we have the second one on the right is about a case where a forensic accountant who's featured in this photo was in a team of investigators who reviewed 60 million documents related to unfair practices at Airbus. And the artificial intelligence searched for patterns and spotted snippets that were out of place where wrongful practices had taken place, and such as they found a sports sponsorship deal which was unfairly set up. So the researchers in the third one, which is a very latest one where hundreds of sewage leaks in the UK are being detected because of AI. And this news item shows that the researchers have spent years gathering data, how the flow rates in the treatment plants how they can be taught to recognize the shape of the flow. So when a wastewater plant is operating normally and when it is spilling untreated wastewater into rivers. So this is the way they are spotting the leaks because of AI. And the final one is a case that you might have come across where Amazon was using a method for shortlisting participants who were applying for jobs. And they found that this system that they had set up in 2014 was not rating candidates in a gender neutral way. In fact, it was not shortlisting women candidates at all. And then they found that the software that they had been using, which had been the data that was running in the background, was collected over a 10-year period. And it was that time period when there were fewer women employed into the tech industry. So these examples where things have gone wrong show that how machine learning based AI systems, if they are trained with incomplete data or distorted data, it can lead to a biased thinking, and which may in fact magnify prejudice, create inequality, even spread rumors and fake news, and even cause physical harm, just as we've seen in the case of this autonomous driving. So all these examples show how it is important to choose the data that is fed into the AI. So from here on, and for the next few slides, what I'll do is I will pick up some themes from the literature, which show about how HCI is changing or adapting in the age of AI. And most of these literature is based around the ACM database and specifically around the Interactions magazine, which is and one of the ACM's HCI magazine. And they have a special column on UX meets AI, and most of the papers I have actually found there because they are very practice oriented and really important issues. So one of them, which is the latest one, talks about the user experience of data and understanding these data sets and working with these data sets is very critical to a good user experience. And they talk about the role of an HCI practitioner to make this data usable, relevant, and to have good quality. And they mention about the FAIR principles, which are used in data science, of how to make data findable, accessible, interoperable, and usable. Then another thing that runs through the literature when we talk about HCI in the context of AI-enabled systems is how AI and data are becoming design materials, and how AI can enrich user interface design in interesting and useful ways. So I'll give you an example here. So let's say that my alarm clock has been set up to wake me up at 5:30 in the morning, and I have to reach work at a particular time by driving. And if this alarm clock is interfaced with the weather app, it notices one day that it's going to be very rainy and it's going to take me more time to drive. So it wakes me up 20 minutes earlier. Now that's an adaptive user interface, which is adapting to the context and serving my needs in a way that make me reach my appointments and my other commitments at the right time. So there are about 2 or 3 papers in this area especially by this group, which is Dove and other authors. And I'll mention another author later on, which is Yang, who work at Carnegie Mellon. And they have a number of papers which talk about the use of AI and data as design materials. And these are two quotes from the paper, just to signify how the user experience practice is changing. They say that it's no longer enough for user experience designers to just focus on the user experience by paying attention to usability, utility, and the aesthetics. In fact, the best user experiences now will come when you're automatically personalizing the offers for that particular user and their context, and the systems that show the detailed understanding of people and the world to provide new value. And this is one of the ACM CHI conference papers of 2017. Then there are other ways in which HCI is being discussed in the age of AI. So if an AI-enabled system provides on the basis of the data that it's been collecting for whatever number of years, it's now in a position to provide this cancer diagnosis. So an HCI practitioner's role is discussed in these cases in the context of following the ethical considerations on the quality of the data, providing the information to the user, so the explainability and providing it in a comprehensible manner, and also how this information, the decisions that are taken by the AI system are being communicated to the user. So they are explainable, and they also have an effective mode of communication, because they talk about the black box problem in AI. So if a medical diagnosis intelligence system, which is predicting the likelihood of cancer based on patient's personal data, then explainable AI in that case would be where you're providing the reasons for the prediction to the patient through the user interface. So that should be comprehensible, that should be useful, and it should be communicated in the right manner. Then another bit of literature, specifically in human robot systems, and one of our colleagues from Malaysia here expressed that interest. There is a lot of discussion on moving from automation to human autonomy systems, where and they talk about how the human should still remain in control. He should still remain the decision maker, and the user always should remain in the loop. And there are several papers in this which discuss about the human autonomy systems and the role of HCI and human factors practitioners in ensuring that human remains at the center. Then IDEO, a design company, it talks about, instead of talking about artificial intelligence, they talk about augmented intelligence. And because it reflects, they feel, the focus on enhancing rather than replacing people's capabilities through technology in human AI systems. And they also focus on AI's impact on humans and society. And they have several case studies on their website of how they have developed AI-enabled system. They also provide a design thinking toolkit, which can be applied for design of human AI-enabled or AI-enabled systems. But in all these discussions, what really comes up is about the responsible and ethical AI practices. And it is highlighted that how HCI practitioners have a critical role to play, that the AI practices are ethical in nature. So Google has developed a toolkit, which is a responsible toolkit, and I've included the URL here. And they have discussed their whole guidebook in terms of fairness, interpretability, the privacy, and the security when you are dealing with human AI systems. Then only in December 2020, Rolls-Royce came up with a framework called the Alethea framework, which is on ethical AI design. And it's very much like a heuristic evaluation checklist kind of an approach, where you have 32 facets of various issues related to reliability, safety, trustworthiness, and designers can apply that to see that they are following an ethical AI design. But it's also a very useful tool for organizations to think about whether AI is being used usefully or not. Is there a role for AI there, or it is just being used for the sake of it? So it's a kind of lots of that triggers people's thinking about why we are using AI. MIT's AI blind spots is a very interesting toolkit. Again, it's also used for training HCI practitioners to think about the ethical issues in AI. And it has very much like the IDEO cards. It's got cards, and those cards can be used for training. So you think about the issues of ethical practice, and then you look at various examples at the back of that card. So I just talk about the Alethea framework, because I think it's a very interesting one, because it also helps organizations to think about. And so it has 32 facets of societal impact, governance, and trust and transparency. And once you've designed something using AI, then what happens is this framework also provides a continuous automated checking process. So as AI takes its decisions, it's able to track that is there any bias, is there any malfunction, and it allows human intervention to control and correct it. And again, this is available on the website, and it's available in the public domain, and it might be interesting to look at that as well. So then, as I mentioned earlier, that there is a set of authors at Carnegie Mellon and related universities there who are collectively looking, and Yang is one of them, and Dove is another one of them, who are looking at HCI in the age of AI. And what they have done is they have done some surveys to look at how the challenges HCI practitioners, most of them their alumni, who are facing challenges when they are working on AI-enabled applications. And these are some of the challenges that they have outlined in their papers. So the challenges are understanding how AI works. And in fact, you will notice as I go down this list, each of the challenge builds on the previous challenge. So if you don't know how AI works, there is a challenge in understanding AI's capabilities. And then there is a challenge in envisioning any novel things that you would do to solve a given UX problem, because you don't know the capabilities of it. Then there is a challenge to map out the right user stories and the use cases for a minimum viable AI systems. And because all these challenges are existing, there is a challenge in iterative prototyping and testing the human AI interactions. And therefore, you aren't able to craft thoughtful interactions with human AI systems. And they also point out how, because of the lack of this, the lack of the terminology and in their training and in their education, and because of not having worked with AI before, they also find a challenge communicating and collaborating with AI engineers and machine learning specialists. There are two arguments in the literature here. One of them says that, yes, we agree that AI is a new and difficult design material, but they suggest that over time, the known HCI methods will address these challenges. And others argue that user-centered design needs to change in order to work for AI. So both these arguments exist, and Yang and Dove, both the authors mentioned in this, go a lot in detail. In fact, Yang has done her PhD in this area about the challenges of designing AI-enabled systems for HCI practitioners when AI is a very significant design material for enhancing user experience. Then there is another set of authors which are coming very much from a CSCW background, the computer supported cooperative work, and thinking very much from the teaming aspect. They say that the human-computer interaction, which is very much based on a stimulus and a response, has now moved to human-computer integration. So they talk about interaction moving to integration, where there is a partnership between the human and the computer, and there is a codependence or a partnership between the human and the computer. And these are some of the quotes from the paper, and I'll pick up one or two from here. So they say that with a traditional HCI lens of interaction, human is the user who is learning what to do. But as soon as you adopt an integration lens for an AI-enabled system, the software assumes also the position of a learner. And they say that the designer, an HCI designer, needs to step back and think about, from the basic interaction, they need to think about the concept of engagement, as there is an ongoing partnership between the human and the machine. And after asking the question, so what do HCI practitioners do when they design, build, and evaluate products around integration? They agree at the end that approaches such as ethnography, contextual design, the use of personas, they may find new uses as we support activities with even a finer granularity when we come to human AI systems. So again, these papers are available in the ACM database, Farooq included, and Zoo 2019 extends the ideas of Farooq including and comes up with this with the framework which I just showed to you about human-computer integration. So what we did was we looked into the literature over the last few months, and we started mapping this, that what are those from the various papers and the literature we were looking at, what are the various methods which are being used for design of human AI systems. And this was the toolbox I was mentioning in my introduction. And you will notice that many of these methods come from traditional HCI, and some of them are new because we are talking about a new problem here. So design thinking is something that is talked about a lot in the design of human AI systems. They talk about the different phases. As you know, design thinking has 5 phases, and they talk about empathy mapping, personas, brainstorming, storyboarding, some very much coming from traditional HCI literature. And IBM has developed a design thinking toolkit for AI. And I will show you that in one of the slides, just to give you an idea of how they have developed that toolkit. Then there are lots of guidelines that are available. And the key ones that I've pointed out here are from Microsoft. Microsoft has published a paper in the 2019 CHI conference, and they have brought about 20 years of literature together to develop these guidelines. And I'll show you a slide with some subset of these guidelines. And it's all evidence-based, and it's gone through a proper evaluation. And the guidelines are quite good and useful for human AI interaction. Google also, through its work internally, though it doesn't outline the whole methodology for developing these guidelines, but it's developed a guidebook, and it says it's over many years of research. They have developed a people and AI guidebook. Amazon, through its work with Alexa over the years, has developed a design guide specifically for voice user interfaces. And again, it's available in the public domain. Then there are some design frameworks. These design frameworks are more for the designer to think about the various issues that come up when you're designing an AI-enabled system. And I will show you both these two, the HAI framework and the Human-Centered AI Canvas, in one of the slides just following this. And then we've already seen the ethical considerations from Google's responsible AI, the Alethea framework from Rolls-Royce, and MIT's AI blind spots, all helping a designer to think about the ethical considerations of the AI itself and about the data. Has it been ethically collected, in the sense, has a consent been given, how the data was collected, what are the source of the data, and so on. Then there is again, specifically in human autonomy teaming, they talk about how the functions can be divided between the human and the machine, and some new methods and some old methods. And they say an integrated approach is required to understand how the tasks can be divided between a human and a machine, where the human still remains in control if it is required and if they have to intervene in certain situations. And some of these methods are quite familiar to us. They come from the cognitive systems engineering literature. So as you will notice, it's a mix of old and new coming through, depending upon what is applicable for the characteristics of human AI systems. So this is one of the frameworks I was mentioning, and it is developed by Zoo, and he talks about that the development of a human-centered AI system, you have to take into account 3 key things. One is the ethics, so that you're avoiding discrimination, you are maintaining fairness. Then the technology, that it augments human intelligence and human capabilities, and how it is, even the AI technology that is used reflects human intelligence. And then the human factors design, that we've talked about the issues of how AI solutions should be explainable, comprehensible, useful, and usable, so that the AI doesn't just be a black box for the users. The users know through the user interface why a particular decision or a set of decisions was taken. So you will notice he's brought the various things together, which are appearing elsewhere in the literature, into this kind of a visual. But I still wanted to introduce you to it so that you know the various authors who are working in this area and looking from different perspectives. This is another framework, and it is not really an academic article, doesn't have any references. It appeared on Medium, but it is a very useful one. And what it does is that it shows you the, sorry, let me go back. Yeah, this one. So what it does is it very clearly, it has 10 blocks, which makes a designer think about why are you using AI and how would human and machine work in collaboration. But it is very much based in an organization setting where you are thinking about change management. So if you introduce AI, how would it affect the employees in any way? What will be the biases, possible biases that could appear and how they could be avoided? But a lot of time in this particular article is spent upon thinking about how human and machine can work in collaboration. And what is very good about this human-centered AI canvas is that each of these 10 parts of this canvas have questions. And these questions in this paper act as triggers to think about. And if not for anything else, I feel that this canvas just helps to think about the issues for a designer or for when you're designing human AI system. So it's a good training tool as well if you were planning to help somebody to understand the design of human AI systems. Then these are the Microsoft guidelines, and there are 18 guidelines. And here I've just presented a snapshot here of 3 guidelines. So, and what is very good about the guidelines is that they give you, for every guideline, they give you an example. So even if the guideline is not very clear, by having that explicit example, you can then apply it for whatever system that you are designing. So it says, like, I just pick up one, make clear why the system did what it did. So enable the user to access an explanation of why the AI system behaved as it did. And they give an example that if there is a route chosen by an app, which was based on the fastest route, you show it in the subtext that this was the fastest route. That's why I'm suggesting this particular route. And these, again, these guidelines are available in the public domain. And along with these guidelines, there are lots of training materials as well. You will find a similar card approach that to use these guidelines and for different stages of a user-centered life cycle. So again, a very useful training tool. As I was mentioning earlier, IBM has developed a design thinking toolkit for AI. To access the full toolkit, you have to log into the site and establish your membership there. And I've used one of my addresses just to be a member so that I can access the full toolkit. Otherwise, the full toolkit is not available unless you become one of the members. And for the moment, they have kept it free for accessing this toolkit. And they divide the whole thing into 3 stages: observe, reflect, and make. And reflection is something that they spend a lot of time on because they really want to see that how the data is being collected, how does the AI solve the user's problems, how will the data be taught in order to serve the user's needs, and what are the current users' experiences. So they spend a lot of time on reflect, and then they suggest a number of techniques like vignettes, paper-based prototyping, experience-based roadmaps for making. That is for the prototyping stage. So there is a lot of thrust. In fact, I have found this initial thrust a lot in the initial process of a human-centered life cycle when you're developing a human AI system, because it is at that time you're clarifying what is the role of AI going to be and how is this AI going to solve the problem that a user possibly has. And then we come to this Google AI guidebook, which I mentioned earlier. It's divided into stages very similar to what a human-centered life cycle is, but then it takes an example of designing a health app. And through that example of a health app, it explains each of the stages of the life cycle of designing a human AI system. And the ones that are in red, I've just highlighted. I mean, they are not any more significant or less significant than the other stages, but I just wanted to show you the difference between a traditional HCI design or human interaction with this human integration approach, that there is a lot of time spent on what data would this system need, how the data would be collected, and how would you tune this AI to serve the user's needs. Then about explainability and trust, and also about feedback and control, that the user should have control, and a lot of feedback should be given to the user about why the AI is behaving in the way it is doing so. And as I said, this guidebook is available in the public domain, and it runs over several pages, but it is very easily understandable once you get into the flow of how it is distinct from designing a traditional HCI. And this paper I haven't read in full, but I still wanted to show it to you, which appeared in fact only this month in the magazine of in this ACM magazine of interactions, where they are saying that because if a system is using deep learning in an AI enabled system, how the process of how do you collect data for deep learning, how do you develop a model for deep learning, should in fact be integrated within the user-centered design process. So they have suggested this kind of an integrated process where they have adapted the existing UCD process between the user requirements and evaluation. They have put this into it, that how do you collect the data and how do you develop the model. And one of the quotes that I picked up from the paper was that the user-centered design process must be adapted by incorporating data collection and iterative model development for deep learning itself. So this is another way that it's not just the techniques and the methods around it, but it's also the basic UCD process needs to be adapted for deep learning and for an AI-enabled system. Then from the literature, we picked up a few techniques for evaluation. And again, you will find it's quite similar to what was in the design. In fact, in some of the cases, it's just a mirror image of that. So in design thinking, they have suggested Wizard of Oz prototyping. And this is a technique which is being used for human robot systems. It's had a revival. This Wizard of Oz technique is proving to be, it's just been revived because of this human robot systems. And I'll be happy to send you a paper which goes over the literature right from the time when Wizard of Oz was introduced, I think 30s and 40s, 1930s and 40s, to now, how this method has evolved and how it is being used for human robotic systems. Then analytical evaluation, the design frameworks that we talked about earlier, they can also be used for evaluation, the ethical considerations, and of course, any evaluation with the users is important when you are evaluating any HCI or human AI system. So from all this, what we are seeing is that the HCI practice is changing, and these are just some of the summary points. I know that there is much more. This is no way exhaustive, but just to summarize a few things that we've come across today, is the focus is on dynamic function allocation between human and machine. And if a HCI practitioner has to work in this area, he needs to understand the capabilities and limitations of machine learning and AI. And just as we talk in traditional HCI systems, that user experience can't be an afterthought, it becomes even more important here that the machine learning professionals and data scientists and user experience designers should work together to see that how this particular AI system will meet the user's needs, what are the user experience criteria, how the data would be collected, how the algorithms would be trained, and how do you avoid this algorithmic bias. And ethics also, we are as HCI practitioners, because of our user-centered ethos, we are in the right position to think about the ethical AI design and emphasize the enhancement of human capabilities rather than the replacement. So what we are looking for, and which has been mentioned in some of the papers by Yang and Dove and his co-authors, is we are looking for interdisciplinary skills for our HCI practitioners who assess these ethics related issues, and they start thinking about a human AI system from a broader socio-technical systems perspective. So this is my final slide, and this slide is merely to trigger thoughts and discussion amongst us, if we have time today or in future, which is about now that for us as HCI educators, what do we have to do to prepare our students and for design of human AI systems. So I think that some of the things that have come up in the literature is about the concept of a socio-technical system. So it is not just a user and the interface, but we have to think about the wider context in which the AI-enabled system would be used. So we need to bring forth the techniques that we have for contextual design. Our students should also be aware of technologies like AI, data science, machine learning, ethical considerations, even if not in detail. They need to know about what are the various issues that can arise when they are designing systems in association or in collaboration with data scientists and machine learning specialists, know about the concepts of explainability, even think about the HCI design features, which can help to make these explanations more comprehensible and usable, like the principle of progressive disclosure, where you give through the interface, you give the explanation over a set of screens so that depending upon what the user's needs are, perceived needs are. And how do you develop trust with AI systems? As we have seen, the design and evaluation methods are evolving. The design thinking, you have to have a design thinking mindset. We have to go back to the cognitive systems engineering literature and look at the methods which can help to design human-machine integration or teaming and provide skills for working in multidisciplinary teams. So these are my final thoughts to trigger any discussion. Thank you, William, and thank you all for your kind attention.
Thank you, Shailey. I think that's been a very interesting coverage of the current state of the art with the HCAI, human-centered artificial intelligence kind of domain, explainability, and so forth. I'd like to open the time now to questions from the audience.
Okay, and maybe I'll start with one.
Hello, Kai.
Yeah. Hello, Shailey.
Ask a simple one, easy one.
Okay, I promise.
The difficult one, I'll have to ask Simon and Bob to answer it for me. Go ahead, I'm joking.
Yeah. And I mean, it's a very nice overview of what's been people have done, but I think I didn't quite get in terms of what are the research challenges that hasn't been quite addressed yet so far. What are the things you came across as you go through these different papers? And
I think the research challenges, no, I haven't really thought much in that direction as of now, but what I feel is, and this is something that Simon, Bob, and I have been thinking about, is about trust in human autonomy systems. So explainability is one of the factors that can help in developing trust. But what are the other factors that can help in building up trust with these human AI systems? So that is one of the core challenges. I think even the adaptation of human-centered design methods, processes, and methodologies is another research challenge for us to find out what is appropriate in which conditions and why. And to give this practitioner-based, research-based, evidence-based insights to practitioners so that they can usefully use these methods and techniques for their work.
Okay, yeah, thanks.
Don't be shy, guys.
Anything that people think about the HCI education and the implications, because this is something we were interested to knowing, that how do you the HCI education will change?
Yeah, one of the things that I think our HCI education, or HCI educators, we tend to shy away from doing is design. We talk about design, we talk about guidelines for design, we talk about principles for design. But what would, how do we translate those guidelines into design, into practical design, into practice? And so the question comes down to some of these issues that we've highlighted here, like for example, the privacy issues. How do we design a system to steer away from privacy? Or like you're talking about the problems of biased data. How do you design so that people are aware of the biases within the data, for example?
I think there are guidelines in both Google's handbook as well as in the Microsoft guidelines as well. Yeah. But I don't think that there is any source which consolidates this and brings it together. in a meaningful manner. At least that is what our understanding is based on the literature review that we've done.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So I mean that's the issue. I mean, for many of us, it's so how do you actually render the visual form? You know, given the problems that we've identified, like some of the problems we identified early on, things like black box algorithms, opacity, and then there's the need for to be able to identify data that has got links or associations within there, which are biased links, for example, or there are data that may be unverified that has been added to the system, but they're somehow entangled with your profile. So, you know, these are issues that how are concrete issues that I'm thinking how do we design for these kinds of concrete problems? I just wonder whether you guys have thought about it.
No, I don't think so. We have given it a lot of thought. The last few months have been spent in consolidating what we have, what is there out there. And I think the next step is to bring this together into some kind of a meaningful whole, so that we bring these different strands together and develop a kind of either a paper or a report, something that highlights these key issues for people to think. Right. Simon, would you like to add anything to it, please?
Yeah. I think you're maybe underestimating the things that you've done insofar as I think we've had some meaningful conversations about the distinction between principles and guidelines, and Shailey has done a lot of work in the past in that translation, which I think is the translation that you're looking for, William, which is between high-level principles, which it feels like they're taking shape now, and we have those, but then how does this play out in practice? And it feels to me, and I don't know if Shailey agrees, but it feels to me as though we're at quite an early stage of understanding what it means to engender trust, or what it means to even provide an explanation, and what is an explanation, and how is that done in different sorts of different kinds of contexts. It feels like that's perhaps that's the research part of the research challenge that that Kai was talking about.
And can I just follow on that? So maybe either Shailey or Simon, can you say a little bit more just about the research project we are working on? Like, because I'm not fully aware of all the details of what the project is about. I know it means early stage, but maybe you can talk about what was planned, the work that will be done.
The project is really comes out of an interest that DSTL has in emerging interaction technologies, or emerging human-machine interface. They didn't define what they mean by that. They kind of left it for the project to say what that means, and that's been done. But they're interested in a number of things. One is, how do emerging technologies affect cognitive optimization? And in particular, we're looking at the role of augmented reality displays in changing performance and cognitive load in military settings. They're also interested in learnability. So what can we learn about what can we learn from the literature about making novel human-machine interface systems more learnable, or whether they can help with that. And then this is the work that Shailey's doing is part of a strand where they're interested in new techniques for doing user experience design, or doing human-computer interaction, or cognitive systems engineering. They're interested in new techniques for doing that, tools, techniques, and methods. But they've sort of pushed us in the AI direction because they have a big interest in human automation teaming. So that's the work that Shailey's been doing.
Thank you.
Hi, can I ask a question? So
please.
I'm from Sri Lanka, and I'm a HCI educator, and so when we design various degree programs, especially at the undergraduate or postgraduate level. At the moment, currently, HCI studies and artificial intelligence studies are kind of like disjoint. So like we have degree programs specializing in HCI design, and we have degree programs specializing in data science, artificial intelligence, and usually there are no common students between these, and there are no common modules between these. So I think, I mean, looking at this, it looks like the future looks like where we will have to have like common degree programs, or at least like common modules where HCI students learn about AI and AI students learn about HCI, right? Because you can't really separate the two according to, I mean, this looking at this model going forward. And also I think we might, or maybe is it because like AI is basically pretty much becoming commonplace like programming now? I mean, in both those degree pillars right now, we still have programming as a prerequisite. Is it just becoming that AI and machine learning is now a prerequisite for everything, and it's just becoming a prerequisite for HCI as well? Like, what are your thoughts on that? I would like to know.
We have a third year module in user experience design, and for the first time this year we did a session on artificial intelligence, and that was run by Shailey. And so we did it over a Zoom lecture. It was a Zoom lecture, so you could see the chat, and you could see comments coming in from students like, I did HCI to avoid artificial intelligence. I'm going to fail this. I'm now going to fail the module. But the interesting thing was, it became a discussion at the end, and it rapidly became the most interesting session. And a lot of students, thought about, well, they reported how interesting they found it. It was one of the most interesting sessions we had, because people were thinking about ethical issues and issues of what the future might hold, which they found quite engaging. But I think that the point that, sorry, Shailey, I'm not answering the question for you, but I think the point that Shailey made about the need to understand AI and the different kinds of AI and the AI capabilities is going to become increasingly important, because people, they're very undiscriminating at the moment when they just say AI. This is, without talking about what different aspects of that, different sorts of applications there are. I think that's going to become increasingly important.
Thank you for that. I can actually relate to that point myself. So I was actually one of the students who was like, did HCI to avoid artificial intelligence and all the mathematics and, this models and everything. So even right now, I'm a PO HCI researcher. Like if I have a student, MPhil student or someone to supervise who has a HCI or AI component, I seek the help of another co-supervisor who would do the AI related supervision for me, and I would take care of the HCI component. But it looks like we all have to start learning AI now. So I might actually taking a course on the course or something. It's a good idea. Yeah. Well, thank you for the lovely presentation.
Thank you.
I have a question. Yeah, for right now, I see that we have different like frameworks for the design of HCI system, like from IBM, from Google's, which are separated. I don't know. I haven't read the documents yet, so I don't know what kind of similarities we have between the different rules, like for these systems. But guys, don't you think that it's perhaps high time that we have something like common standard framework, which is going to define like things like ethics? Then this kind of document might help us perhaps with the education of HCI systems. Like we are able to define the AI part better, like all the different limits that we have to respect when designing the HCI systems. Do you think that's not coming like something that's important that we need to think about, like coming together in an international like setup, so that we can define these a standard, a good standard for the HCI system?
Good point. I think that just as we have the ISO standards for user-centered design, I'm sure that this will also come through soon, because there is a need for it, for bringing all these things together. And I think the first step that we have seen in that framework, which I which that process, that how they have adapted the UCD process for deep learning indicates that we need a definite process for design of human AI systems along with the ethics, etc. But at the moment, what we have is this diverse set of things. And I think the variety in a way helps, because you see the different perspectives from where people are coming from in terms of their organizational ethics and so on. But it also helps in the process of training, because you come across these different perspectives. And of course, the standard will help over a period of time. But because these are quite varied, one can apply it depending upon what one's context is. So you see what your context is, and you pick up that and apply it to your context. And the others could be used more for training and for understanding. Simon, would you like to add anything to that?
No, I think that's I did perfect response, Shailey.
I